A Bible talk given on the 25th of March 2025 to RMIT Christian Union.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelite go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I will bring out my divisions. My people, the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it." Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Perform a miracle,' then say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake.'" So Moses and Aaron went to the Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptians' magician also did the same thing by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staff. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river. Confront him on the bank of Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Then say to him, 'The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now, you have not listened.' This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water." The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone." Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of the Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magician did the same thing by their secret arts, and the Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace, and did not take even this into heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water, because they could not drink the water of the river.
Great, thanks Heath Nelson, that was excellent. We're really excited about this passage today. We come to the part of the Exodus where God begins to act. So welcome if you're new today. I want to extend my welcome to you as well. Great to have you along with us. Our practice here is to work through books of the Bible. We've been working through the chapters of Exodus up to this point. So today we aim to cover not just chapter 7, but if you flip over to the back of your pamphlet there, you'll see an outline of where we're going today. We're going to try and cover those first 9 plagues, and then next week we'll cover that final 10th plague. So I'll be following that outline. So it's probably best to have that outline. And if you've got a few Bibles I've got up the front here. which you're welcome to come and grab one, or if you've got your Bible. So it'd be good to have the Bible open. I will have most of the references up on the outline, on the screen rather. So you should be able to read it off the screen, but if you do have a Bible in hand and the outline in the other, that's probably the way to go. Okay, philosophers like to talk about the problem of evil. Who's heard that phrase, problem of evil? Anyone? Oh, only a few of you, okay. The problem of evil asks the question, if God is all good, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? Think about this. If God is all-powerful, he can do something about evil and suffering. And if God is all good, then he must care enough to do something about it. So if God is both all-powerful and all good, then why is there so much evil and suffering in the world that he rules? And the problem of evil is not only a philosophical problem, it's also an existential problem too, faced in ordinary life when we're faced with real presence of evil or suffering in the world. You might feel it acutely. You might feel the weight of this problem like a hammer as you think about injustices in our society, in the world around us. Maybe you think about the disasters in Gaza or the war in Ukraine or persecuted Christians in North Korea or the Middle East or any number of disasters going on around the world, right? So that's out there in the world, but you might also feel the problem acutely at a personal level, right? Why would God not do something about this bad thing that's happened to me, right? Doesn't he care? Is he not able? Why this relationship breakdown? Why this family difficulty? Why this illness? Why this hardship, this loss, this tragedy, this struggle? If God is both all-powerful and all good, why doesn't he act? Well, why don't you turn to the person next to you and have a go what you might say in response to that? Why does an all-powerful, all-good God allow evil and suffering in his world? What would you say to someone who asked that question? Give it a go. Right, let me grab your attention again. Philosophers actually drive themselves bananas with these kinds of questions, chasing their tails, trying to unravel these mysteries. But at the end of the day, as Christians, we are given in the Bible a God who has made himself known to us. He has made known the true nature of reality to us. And so that's where a Christian goes to find answers to these kind of questions. Not our own minds and rationality and untangling, but to God's word. And so I begin this way with, as we go back to the book of Exodus, because I think in a large part, that's one of the problems that Israel is facing, right? They're facing the same kinds of questions. They've been having a terrible time. They've been treated appallingly. They faced the threat of genocide from Pharaoh. And now they're in slavery under this intense oppression. And they would have been asking themselves, why is God not doing something? But now something happens, something's big. And several hundred years later, when the prophet Habakkuk reflected on these things, when he reflected on this moment, he looks back at the Exodus and he describes what happened in this way. God came from Teman. His splendour was like the sunrise. Plague went before him. In wrath you strode through the earth. You came out to deliver your people, and you crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. And so that's a kind of helpful summary of what happens in these chapters. The Lord comes on the scene in fierce judgment. At one level, so this story is terrifying. But it is also a story in which we see that God does care about evil and he does something about it. He cares deeply and he's powerful to act. In fact, we'll see that he has absolute power. There's no limits to his power. So the story's not going to answer all of our questions. It makes no claim to that. But it does show us that there's a way to ask these questions about evil and suffering whilst not doubting God's power and goodness. And so the way I'd like to do that is by firstly traversing an overview of these chapters, hence the overview on your outline there. And then we'll be looking at 4 features of the plague before we then think about our response. And I'll give you a chance to share your own response with the person next to you in response to the 4 features before we look at the response. Okay, so be prepared for that. So firstly, an overview. In this part, we'll just consider the first 9 plagues. We're going to save the 10th for next week. It needs its own attention. There's the climactic plague, the 10th one. So the others all kind of build towards that. So far, all of Moses' efforts in confronting Pharaoh have been completely ineffective. He's failed to successfully negotiate the release of God's people. His staff does shapeshift into a snake, but the Egyptian magician's staffs then do the same. So note the magicians in the Bible, they're not illusionists like our modern magicians, right, doing visual tricks. They're actually sorcerers, wielders of black magic and demonic powers. So their snakes also turn into snakes. At that point, it feels like it's kind of a snail bait, mate, right? We've both got snakes, hey? Moses, what are you going to do? Moses' snake does eat the other snakes, but no one really cares about that. Pharaoh just disregards it. It's a draw. I don't care. You're a joke. Get out of here, right? That's Pharaoh's response. So nothing happens. But now something does. God will show his power. And that's where we're picking up the story. God turns the water of the Nile into blood. So specifically, chapter 7, 20 to 23. Moses and Aaron, reading on the screen, Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh, and his officials struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed to blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. So it's pretty horrifying. But even then, notice, Pharaoh does not listen. See, this terrible thing, they don't have any water, but Pharaoh does not listen. 22 to 23. But the Egyptian magicians did the same very things by their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace, and he did not even take this to heart. You hear that emphasis again, right? It's Pharaoh heartlessly shrugging, whatever, I've still got water in here, I've still got some wine, suck it up, I don't care, you're a joke, get out of here. That's Pharaoh for you. So, in response, God sends a second plague. This time it's frogs, right? Some people love frogs, right? Who's a frog lover? No one! We've got one frog lover. Oh, come on, frogs are awesome, I love frogs. Okay, maybe you've just read this story and you put off frogs, I don't know. But these frogs are definitely awful, right? Moses says to Pharaoh, chapter 8, verse 3, the Nile will teem with frogs. They will come into your palace and your bedroom, into your bed, into the houses of your officials, on your people, into your ovens, in your kneading troughs. The frogs will come up on you and your people and all your officials. So this is gross, right? But this time, verse 8, notice, Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron and says, hey, come on, guys, take away the frogs. And they do. But then, as soon as the frogs are gone, Pharaoh resumes his refusal to listen, his hard-heartedness. He digs in his heels. Once again, he's like, the frogs are gone, now you can get lost, right? Same old Pharaoh. Now, whatever you make of this story, though, don't misunderstand Pharaoh as some kind of innocent victim that God has decided to toy with, right? He is a brutal tyrant, if you've been with us up till now. He's committed atrocities of genocidal proportions. He thinks he can take on God and play games with him and treat the lives of his people appallingly. Without hesitation, he authorised the mass murder of the Hebrew babies, and he continues to brutally oppress them. So he's no innocent victim here, right? So more plagues follow. There's a plague of gnats. Here's the challenge for next week. See if you can remember all the plagues in order, right? They're all there on your sheet. See if you can remember them all in order. Give it a go. So far, we've seen blood, frogs, gnats. Moses throws a handful of dust into the air now, and the dust particles become these swarming gnats, right? Then we've got a plague of flies. With the flies, there are actually a couple of new features that come out. Does anyone like flies? Who likes flies? No one likes flies. Are terrible, right? But notice what the first new feature here is there are no flies that come in the region of Goshen, which is where the Hebrews are living. Which must have been super weird, right? If you're walking through Egypt, the flies absolutely everywhere. You walk into Goshen, all of a sudden, no flies. Right? God was protecting his people from the plague of flies and showing him, Pharaoh, who is really in charge. That is, there's a progression through the curses. The first 3 curses are indiscriminately cover everyone, but from the 4th plague onwards, the curses become more and more targeted, more and more precise. In obvious ways, the latter curses do not impact the people of Israel, right? So that's the first new feature. The second new feature here with the plague of flies is that Pharaoh begins to bend a little bit more. Now he says the Israelites may offer sacrifices, but it has to be within Egypt, right? You can't go very far. But then as soon as the flies are gone, he changes his mind. He won't let them go after all. Ever heard of a politician who reneges on his promises? Right. It's quite odd, isn't it? No, that was a joke. Ben got it. Politicians always renege on their promises, right? And so more plagues come. God sends a plague on the livestock, so the livestock die. Though the Israelite livestock are protected, yet Pharaoh still refuses to let God's people go. Then there's a plague of boils all over their body. It'd be terrible, right? But still Pharaoh stubbornly resists. And so following on from that, you have the plague of hail, terrible hail. Have a look at verses 25 and 26. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. The only place it did not hail was the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were. And then look at chapter 10, verse 15. God sends a plague of locusts. They covered all the ground until it was black. This is kind of a cute little locust here, but they're not. Has anyone been in a locust storm? Come on, some of you have seen locust storms in northern Victoria. Yep. Okay, a couple of times. One of you. All right. Anyway, they're terrible. They're everywhere. They get in the grill of your car. Anyway, but it's a lot worse here because, of course, what do? Verse 15. They covered the ground till it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail. Everything growing in the fields and on the fruit of the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. And finally, number 9, there's the plague of darkness. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky. Total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days. Can you imagine what that would be like? Right? Complete darkness. Well, that was a pretty quick rundown, but I want you to notice these 4 features of the story. And the first one is that God's victory over Pharaoh is total. His power is absolute. We see that in what happens to the Egyptian magicians, right? Initially, Pharaoh has his own sorcerers to combat Moses' snake powers. At first, they can almost match Moses in their sorcery. They make staffs into snakes. And in 722, they were also managed to turn water into blood, right, using their own demonic powers, right? And then finally, they also make frogs come out of the Nile, 8 verse 7. And we're not told how they did that, right? But the point is, as the story goes on, they just can't keep up with the power of the God of Moses. Pretty soon, they're left in the dust. Have a look at what happens with the plague of gnats. In 8 verse 18 and 19. That one, yep. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. Since the gnats were on people and animals everywhere, the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Right? So even Pharaoh's own sorcerers recognise this must be the true God acting here. Then when the boils come, have a look at 9:11. Once the boils come, the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians, right? This might be a literal description, right? The boils have made them so uncomfortable, right? So paralysed that they can't even stand in Moses' presence. And then eventually by 10 verse 7, after the hail has destroyed the land, Moses now threatens a locust plague. Pharaoh's officials even try to convince Pharaoh to give way, right? 10 verse 7, Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realise that Egypt is ruined?" Right? You see what they're saying? Egypt is done. Can you just let them go? We've lost. They won. Give up. You can't win this battle, Pharaoh. His own Egyptians are saying that to him. His own magicians. And every time Pharaoh attempts to offer some small concession, partial yielding, each time Moses says to him, not good enough. God will only accept a complete submission, nothing less than total surrender. Let's have a look at how this plays out. Chapter 8, verse 25. He starts to say, well, okay, you can sacrifice, but only here in the land. Moses says, verse 26 and 27, no, not good enough. We're off to the wilderness. Then in chapter 10, verse 11, Pharaoh says, okay, you can go, but only the men, not the women and children. Moses says, nah, we're all going, right? Not good enough. Chapter 10, 24, Pharaoh says to Moses, okay, you can go, women, children, fine, okay, take them. But you have to leave your livestock. Moses says, no, we need the livestock, right? We're going to need them for animal sacrifices, all of them. See how the Lord's victory over Pharaoh is total. He will accept nothing less than total surrender. His demand is absolute. So that's the first thing to notice, right? God's victory is total over the leader of Egypt. Secondly to notice is this theme of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. We saw this last week, chapter 7, verse 3. We read, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. This is God speaking. We read that today, actually. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. But we see it again throughout these chapters. It's repeated again and again. 8 verse 14, we read, when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Then in 8:32, this time also Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go. Then in 9:12, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Okay, so this theme is an important feature of the story that's worth thinking about. The idea of Pharaoh's heart hardening recurs, guess how many? 16 times, right, in these chapters. With 3 different Hebrew words. Don't worry too much about the words. They all refer basically to the same reality. Pharaoh's growing stubbornness, digging in his heels, refusing to budge. His own heart becomes heavier, weighed down, unable to move, unyielding. The other striking thing is the 2 different agents involved here. See, who does the hardening? God hardens Pharaoh's heart. We see that, but Pharaoh hardens his own heart. What's going on? How does this work? Well, I think there's basically 2 things that we can draw from this. Right, you can see how that's the 7 occurrences. It's God. 3, it's Pharaoh explicitly. And then 6 of them, it says just Pharaoh's heart hardened with no subject to the verb. But then it says, as the Lord had said, implying God is the subject of the hardening, right? So what's going on? I think firstly, the narrator is showing us that God is in command here. God takes the initiative. He's in charge, even over Pharaoh's heart and what he does. Even Pharaoh's responses are ultimately controlled by God, and he will kind of play back into the problem of evil. The Bible will not allow us to view the human heart as being beyond God's control, as if God were unable to make Pharaoh act and respond according to his will. In the Bible, throughout the Bible, God's control is absolute, even over human hearts. The Bible never places a limit on the power and rule of God. Now, that might be confronting and unsettling for some of you, and I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards. But it would have been important for both the Egyptians and the Israelites to recognise this. Because in Egypt, Pharaoh was regarded as a god. So the Bible is saying, no, Pharaoh is no god. Yahweh, the God of Israel, is calling the shots even over Pharaoh's heart. which is actually, paradoxically, you might find it unsettling, but it's actually tremendously reassuring. Because it means that even these terrible decisions that Pharaoh is making, God is able to reverse them. Right? The first time we hear this idea is back in chapter 4, where, I don't know if I've got that one up there. No, I don't think I do. Where chapter 4, God promises Moses, I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. So the initiative always begins with God, and that's exactly what happens, right? The Lord is in command. That's the first thing. But the second thing, the feature of these, is that Pharaoh is responsible for the hardening of his heart, right? That might seem contradictory, but the Bible sees no contradiction. Pharaoh is viewed as having a real and clear sense of his own agency. It's really him making these choices and following his own desires. His stubborn refusals are clearly his own choices, and he's held responsible for them. I don't think I need to do too much to persuade you of that. Chapter 8, verse 23, he turned and went into his palace, and he did not take even this to heart. Right, so the Bible holds him accountable. Chapter 9:34, he sinned again, and he and his officials hardened their hearts. Right, so those phrases are indictments upon Pharaoh, holding him responsible and accountable for his response. Now, some people like to talk about free will. And if for you having free will simply means there's a correspondence between what you want to do and what you choose to do, well then absolutely, right? We can talk about that kind of free will. Pharaoh has that kind of free will, so do we, because he does what he wants and we do what we want, right? But of course with Pharaoh, that's the whole problem, isn't it? Him doing what he wants. And in fact, it's the problem with us too, that we do what we want. But then, of course, that kind of free will is not really saying much. But if by free will you mean God cannot stop me and cannot make me do anything, then clearly Pharaoh does not have that free will, and neither do we have that kind of freedom to derail God's plans. God will have his way, even with the human heart, one way or another. Now, there's important theological truths and philosophical truths we see here, which is that human and divine agency are not in competition with each other. Human agency operates within and under God's agency. In fact, human agency is made possible by divine agency. Now, we could say a lot more about that. Ask me afterwards if you want to keep thinking about that. But the main point the Bible is making here, that's super, utterly, abundantly clear, is that human and divine agencies are not a contest of equals, right? That, of course, is how Pharaoh thinks about himself, right? As a god, as the one who does whatever he wants. And if you ignore the theme of God hardening Pharaoh's heart, that's what the story looks like, doesn't it? If you take those bits out. It looks like you have Pharaoh and his magicians and the officials versus the Lord and Moses, Aaron, and they're a contest of equals. But the Bible is saying it's not like that. Even though Pharaoh is in Egypt, Pharaoh is regarded as a god, it turns out to be nothing like that. The Lord is utterly in command here, even over Pharaoh's heart. Remarkable. It's a surprise to us as modern Westerners who think we do whatever we want. But again, chat to me afterwards if you want to keep talking about that. Number 3, God is not just showing his power over Pharaoh's heart, he's showing his power over all creation. As the creator, each of these plagues is an act of the creation and its creatures. You've got water and blood and animals and sickness and weather and light and darkness. And so each of them shows that God's power to undo the created order and make it malfunction is really clear, but also his power to restore that order after each plague. Each time God brings the restoration again and healing to the land, right? And so when you think about it, the restoration is actually even more remarkable statement about God's power than the initial calamity that he brings. And so there's a kind of terrible, awful appropriateness to the destruction that then unfolds. Pharaoh is murderously attacking God's good order, and so God gives Pharaoh a land of disorder. You see, Pharaoh, this is what you want. You want disorder? You want anarchy? I will give you anarchy. I'll give you creation anarchy. The fabric of creation unravels as God sends his commands upon it. Right? We're kind of returning back to that primal darkness of Genesis 1 verse 2. Remember that? Where all the creation is kind of messed up. It lacks order. And then God speaks and brings order to it. God is now returning it to that kind of order in the nation of Egypt. But it turns out that God is not only showing his power over the natural world, and this one isn't on your outline there, but I added it in because I think it's kind of interesting. It's not only of the natural world, but also his supremacy over the supernatural world. Because each of these plagues actually corresponds to a different Egyptian god, right? Happy, the god of the Nile, right? He's meant to bring prosperity to the Egyptians. God says the Nile is going to become blood, right? Not so happy now, right? Ben liked it. I'm a dad, I can make dad jokes, right? Or Heket, the Egyptian frog god. God says, I'm going to make the frogs go wild, right? Ra, you've heard of Ra, the sun god in Egypt, right? God says, no more sun, right? 3 days. You see what God is saying again and again. He is the God of all gods, the Lord of all lords. And even the members of Pharaoh's own household begin to recognise that as the plagues unfold, don't they? He's the God of all gods. He's showing those other gods as not gods, as false gods, as gods of their imagination. Why all the drama? Why all this repeated emphasis? Why so many plagues? Have a look at the conclusion back in verse 29. Can you see the reason there? Have a look, verse 29 of chapter 9. Moses replied, when I've gone out of the city, I'll spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord. The thunder will stop and there will be no more hail. So you may know that the earth is the Lord's, right? I think that's the key statement, right? The earth is the Lord's. It belongs to him. That's why he controls all of these things, right? Frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, light, dark, rivers. He controls it all. Right? The earth is the Lord's. The final feature of this story is the purpose, though, of establishing a certain confidence in knowing God, so that you may know. So that you may know. We know that this God is the creator and ruler and judge since Genesis 1. He has been in control. But the Egyptians didn't know that, right? And the Jewish people had stopped crying out to God. They'd lost confidence in God. And so God gives them this glorious moment in history to make clear who runs the world. He's the one who commands the very fabric of creation to hold together or to unravel at the times and places he chooses. And this final feature of the story is this kind of clear purpose for which God acts, right? Again and again, there's this refrain, so that you may know. It's not enough for God to win this battle. His name must be proclaimed. His reputation must be upheld. His victory has to be seen. People have to know him, right? This is what God is doing here against Pharaoh. He's making his name known. He's declaring his triumph. He's putting a stake in the ground for a world that doesn't know him, so that his victory will be complete and undeniable. And that's God's response to evil in the book of Exodus. That is what he does in the face of unjust suffering of his people. He puts an end to evil, right? That's what God does. He acts in judgment. He comes with terrible wrath to utterly destroy the arrogant bully who abuses them. This is what it looks like for God to do something about evil. Well, there's some features of the plagues. I now want to give you an opportunity to turn to the person next to you and just respond. Which one of those features struck you the most and got you thinking? Share, how do you respond to that? Take a moment to respond. Which one of those struck you the most and why? Yeah, that's got a few conversations going. If I could just grab your attention again. Have you ever longed for God to put an end to evil, to do something dramatic and decisive against evil? Real horrifying injustice. Why doesn't God do something in our day? But once you've seen what's gone on here, God's acts of judgment, you can't ask this question in a way anymore that dismisses the kind of God that's revealed to us here. God's judgment is a fearsome thing. And we need to be honest, do we really want this? Right? Do we really want this kind of devastation unleashed? If God were to answer our cry to him for justice. And that's why we need to get right with God ourselves if we're going to be ready for God's coming justice. And thankfully, through Jesus, God has made that possible so that wretched sinners like you and I can be ready for that day by simply trusting in Jesus. And we should actually want this coming justice to come when you consider the evils of the world, when people do wrong, right, by others, when they abuse others, right? Surely we would want God to act and do something about it. It's right to ask him for justice. There is a right way to petition God for those things. God, why will you come and bring justice? Please bring your kingdom. There is a way of asking that out of unbelief, right? Doubting God's willingness and capability, right? God, why don't you do something, right? You clearly don't care, right? Do you see how that's not asking in faith, right? But there's also a way to ask it in faith, confident of God's willingness and capability. Are your prayers like that? Right? Confident of God's willingness and capability. Go back and read these stories again. You'll see God's willingness and his capability. But more than this, God also gives us an answer to the question of the problem of evil at one level. And the answer Christians have always believed is that God has and is coming to deliver from evil and suffering. We know this because God has acted and is still acting. God has acted to save and he's still saving. He's done it in the coming of his anointed King Jesus. And one of the most stunning features of Jesus' life is his frontal assault on evil. This is one of the things that really struck me when I first read through the Gospels as an adult, investigating Christianity towards the end of my degree. My prior view of Jesus was that he was a bit of a pushover, fairly weak, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, can't really do much. He's kind of, bit of a loser, really. We think of Jesus as calm and compassionate, right? And certainly he was controlled and calm and compassionate. But he was not calm and compassionate with the demons, right? If you've read through the Gospels, he fiercely tosses them out. Jesus comes with a fierce assault on the demonic, upon hostile spiritual forces. That's a consistent, prominent feature of his ministry. There's not much of this kind of thing in the Bible, and that's because when Jesus comes, he brought them out of the woodwork. Right? The arrival of God's King brings all the demons out, running to expose him, to undermine his mission. But Jesus shows that his authority in opposing them is absolute. Right? The demons end up begging him, right, that he wouldn't torment them. And the people that saw this are really shaken up by this, not primarily because of the demonic presence, but because of Jesus' authority over these spiritual hostiles. And so they struggled to find ways to explain it. So at one point they accused Jesus of doing this because he himself was evil. They say, well, you must be evil too if you're doing this. It provokes this really blistering response from Jesus. He absolutely roasts them. Have a look in Luke's Gospel in chapter 11. Here we go. Jesus was driving out a demon that was mute. When the demon left, the man who had been mute spoke, and the crowd was amazed. But some of them said, by Beelzebub, that's a name for the devil or Satan, the prince of demons, he's driving out the demons. And others tested him by asking for a sign from heaven. Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, any kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and a house divided against itself will fall. If Satan is divided against himself, how can his kingdom stand? I say this because you claim that I drive out demons by Beelzebub. Now, if I drive out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your followers drive them out? so then they will be your judges. But if I drive out the demons by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Did you notice that phrase that he uses there, that we've read already tonight? By the finger of God. It's not a common phrase used in the Bible. It's used 4 times. Twice it's used to refer to God's inscription of the stone tablets, right, by the finger of God, right? Once here, and the one other time that phrase is used is when the Egyptian magicians are dismayed that they can't match Moses' miracles, right? Do you remember? They say, this is the finger of God. This is the work of the true God. That's Exodus 8, verse 19. And so what then is Jesus saying by picking up this phrase, right, from the Exodus? Jesus is saying, do you remember that triumph, right, of God with all the plagues, that kind of judgment? That's the kind of judgment that I am bringing in my ministry. I am bringing God's work, the great victory, right? The relentless, unmatched, unquenchable firepower of God against evil. That's what I'm bringing. That's what Jesus is saying. And so then Jesus continues with this parable. Over the page. When a strong man, fully armed, guards his house, his possessions are safe. But when someone stronger attacks and overpowers him, he takes away the armour in which the man trusted and divides up his plunder. Right? What does this mean? Well, you've got a strong man and then you've got a stronger man. The strong man, he's fully armed. He's confident in his own arsenal to defend his own house. Right? But a stronger man comes to overpower this confident strong man. Now, there may be an allusion here to what's happening with Pharaoh. If that's true, then Jesus is saying, remember the plagues? Remember how God, with absolute power, overcame and conquered Pharaoh with the plagues? Just as with Pharaoh, a strong man who felt utterly secure and powerfully protected was overcome and plundered. So that same power and purpose of God is what I'm now bringing to conquer evil, all evil, right? The evil that has enslaved this world by the all-powerful finger of God. And isn't that what Jesus says elsewhere in John's Gospel? As Jesus' own life reaches its climax in John 12:31, now this is the judgment of the world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. This is Jesus' deliberate and relentless purpose, to bring judgment upon evil, to drive out the ruler, Satan, who proudly and wickedly stood against God and held his people captive. He's talking about this monstrous bully who stands behind all bullies, right? Of whom Pharaoh was really just a public face. Jesus talking about the one the Bible calls the evil one, the devil or Satan. Now, in our secularized world, we aren't used to talking about evil in those kind of terms, right? We don't go around talking about, this guy murdered that person. Oh, that's because, of demonic powers. We're not really comfortable using that kind of language. We don't really know what to do with it. And it's common for people to make the dangerous mistake then of just carelessly dismissing Satan as a joke or having no power. But the Bible's insistent that if we're going to have a grasp on evil, if we're going to understand it, right, take it seriously, then we have to reckon with the spiritual dimensions of our existence, with the supernatural dimensions of evil. And the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is that he came with deliberate and relentless purpose to conquer evil and the evil one. Right? Isn't that good news? But of course, the judgment that he brought was different. And it was different because the operation, it was different to the Exodus, because his operation was a delicate one. Because the ruler who held God's people captive was not just a powerful man with an army and a kingdom, but a spiritual authority who had a territory in every human heart. How do you combat that, right? How do you combat a hidden army, right? A hidden enemy who has a power in every human heart, who has deceived the world into thinking that God doesn't matter, God doesn't care, right? He can't just be pushed out in one simple moment of victory. And so it's a 2-stage victory. Stage 1 his claim over them has to be broken. A ransom has to be paid to redeem them. And that's what happens on the cross. Jesus pays the ransom. Satan's claim over people's hearts is broken so that now people can be released. Their sins can be forgiven. We can be freed to serve God and have true life. And this is why we're so passionate about Jesus and his victory at the cross. Right? That's why we keep talking about Jesus. It's a dangerous mistake to look at the cross of Jesus, though, and dismiss that as weak and powerless. Don't make that mistake. Jesus' cross was a defeat in the eyes of the world, right? Who looks at a man crucified and goes, there's the winner, right? Right, so I get that. It looks like defeat. But in that moment, God delivers the final decisive blow that rips open the stranglehold of Satan on human hearts. That's stage one. But then there's stage two, and we're still in stage two. God's unfolding story of his war against evil. The prince of this world is being driven out as people come to follow Jesus, as they come to trust him. And as surely as Pharaoh was finally overcome, Satan too will be finally overcome. In the end, God will settle for nothing less than a total victory over Satan. The whole drama of human history is in his hands. He controls all political, economical, military powers. And in the end, all the earth will see his salvation. He even controls human hearts. Just as God showered these judgments on the Egyptians so that all would know that he is the Lord, he now declares that every knee will finally bow before Jesus. So the story of the plagues is a picture of God's unshakable, fearsome assault on the evils of this world. It's a picture of God, what God will do in the end with evil, right? With the evil that we're bound up with, and with the evil that afflicts us and others. But now is the time of his patience, right? Of him waiting for people to repent and put their trust in Jesus. He won't let this opportunity go on forever, though, right? There's this urgent need for us to repent and trust Jesus today. And so let me just finish by noticing that none of this is intended to give us a philosophical explanation about the problem of evil. We don't get some philosophical syllogism or equation that makes everything make sense. We don't get some massive cosmic spreadsheet, right, where all the numbers add up and we can say, now I see why God was doing it this way, right? We don't get that. We don't get all the answers. Evil always has to be suffered and endured, not primarily comprehended. Fundamentally, we mostly don't need an explanation for evil, but the confidence that something will be done about it. And that's what the Bible is all about. But don't let anyone tell you, and don't let yourself believe, that God either does not care about injustice and evil or cannot do anything about it. This whole story screams against that. The God we worship is the God who came to deliver his people, whose splendour was like the sunrise. Plague went before him. In wrath he strode through the earth. He crushed the ruler of the land of wickedness. That same God is the one who in love gave us his only Son. And he is fiercely, relentlessly, utterly against evil. And he will have the victory in the end. Well, that's all from me today. I'm going to pray for us in response to what we've heard. Please pray with me. Our gracious, loving Father of our Lord Jesus, we praise you as the Holy One, that you are fierce in your wrath. You are infinitely good. We would long for things to be simply good and just in our life. But it's clear that we live in a broken world, a world enslaved to the evil one, captured by his lies that would deny you and deny your Son. And so we thank you that in Jesus you've broken the stranglehold of evil. You've acted decisively in your victory over injustice in our world. And so we ask that you would help us with our confusions and our difficulties, our struggles and the pains of life, with endurance and with our doubts and worries. Deepen our confidence in your Son, in his definitive victory over evil. and give us confidence to look forward to that day when your goodness will flood the earth and fill it with life and love when evil is completely done for. Amen.